Hi, my name is John Brody. I'm Technology Principal for Natural Cheese here at Sargento Foods. And I'd like to introduce you to some of the top-selling cheeses we have here at Sargento. The first one on my list is cheddar cheese, which of course comes to us from England, a small village called Cheddar, and they started making this cheese there in the 12th century. As the British Empire grew, the cheese they started to make the cheese in Australia and New Zealand and ultimately in Canada and the United States. And the cheese has become extremely popular all over the world. So much so that it is the top-selling cheese in the world. And in the United States itself, where we eat about 29 pounds of cheese per annum per person, we actually eat 10 pounds of cheddar each. So that we eat quite a lot of this cheese. Just to tell you about the cheese, it's a simple enough cheese to make in terms of cheese making. It's made with whole milk straight from the cow. You don't have to do anything with it. You put in rennet and bacteria. You cook it slightly and cut it and develop curds and whey. You drain the whey and then you put the curds, after they've developed enough acidity, into a mold which is lined with a cheesecloth. You press that overnight and the following morning you have a 40-pound block of cheese. It's not really cheddar at this stage until it's been ripened, and to ripen it, it's put into an aging room where we will keep it for anywhere from 1 month to numerous years in some cases. In Sargento, we have two styles of cheddar that sell really well. One is mild cheddar. Now, mild cheddar would be allowed to ripen for around 2 to 3 months, and it has a mild taste and flavor. And as the cheese gets older and it's left in the ripening room longer, it becomes medium at about 5 months, and then it becomes sharp at 7 months and beyond. As cheese ripens, it develops a more and more intense flavor over time. So if we just look at some cheese here, we can see this cheese is about 8 months old, and the flavor on it has gone from being extremely bland when it was made originally to being quite complex and distinctly cheddary in flavor. So this is a wonderful attribute for the cheese, that it does this, because it makes the versatility of the cheese open to many different things. The cheese will be colored if we've added annatto dye to the milk, and it will be white if we have not added annatto dye. Annatto dye is a dye that is a natural dye that comes from South America. It's grown, it's a berry that grows on a plant called a annatto tree, and it doesn't give any flavor to the cheese. In fact, a cheese grater, experienced cheese grater, if he was blindfolded, would not be able to tell you whether the cheese contained annatto or not. So it's purely there for aesthetics. Cheddar cheese, of course, can be eaten cold as a snacking cheese, as a table cheese. It can be put into recipes, cooked. It's a wonderful cheese when it's cooked because it melts properly and gives a very good appearance. And it works wonderful in dishes like macaroni and cheese and toasted cheese sandwiches and the likes. The next cheese I want to talk about is Kojak, a Wisconsin favorite. Kojak was first developed in Arena, Wisconsin, and it's the amalgamation of two cheeses into one. The two cheeses, of course, are Colby and Monterey Jack. Colby is also a cheese that was first made in Wisconsin, in the town of Colby in 1882. The story about it being made runs more or less as follows. The cheesemaker was making cheddar cheese one day, and a friend of his called on him and asked him would he like to go for a beer, and the cheesemaker, being fond of beer, said that he would, but he was in the middle of making the cheese and he needed some way to slow the process down while he went for his beer with his buddy. And what he did was he flooded the cheese vat with water in the middle of the process, and after he came back to finish off making the cheese, he found that the cheese had a higher moisture than cheddar, and it also had a sweeter texture. And this cheese, when it was eventually packaged and sold, was a big favorite, and the manufacture of Colby is made almost the same way today. However, unfortunately, the cheesemaker is normally not allowed to go for a beer in the middle of the process. Monterey Jack, on the other hand, is a cheese that came from Mexico and came up the north coast of America up into California, but it originally came to Mexico via the Spanish. And when they came to Mexico, they brought their cheese-making techniques with them, and the monasteries and friars who made a lot of cheese eventually migrated up the north coast of the United States up to California, and the cheese came with them. And by about 1916, the cheese was well established, and the first factory to make this cheese was assembled in Monterey by a guy called David Jacks, and the cheese became known as Monterey Jack after him. In total in America, between Monterey Jack and Kojak and Colby, we eat 3.2 pounds per annum. When we make Kojak, a cheesemaker has to make 2 vats of cheese simultaneously. He makes the vat of Colby. Colby, of course, has a natto dye added to it, and that dye gives it its red color. At the same time as he's making that vat of cheese, he makes his vat of Monterey Jack, which is a white cheese. And just before the salt is added to the cheese, and just prior to it being put into cheese molds, similar to the way cheddar is made, the 2 curds are mixed together, which gives us a beautiful look with respect to the red and white curd in the cheese. The cheese is pressed and then put into storage for approximately 3 months before it is sold. Typically, Kojak cheese is not allowed to age for 7 or 8 months, but is rather sold before it gets to 6 months, where it's still sweet and soft and very enjoyable, and has many applications. So it can be used as both a table cheese, as a culinary ingredient in many recipes, and as a snacking cheese. And as you can see from our display here, in Sargento, we put it into sticks and into cubes and slices and shreds. And really, Monterey Jack and Colby coming together make a perfect combination of 2 great cheeses in one. The next family of cheeses that I'd like to talk to you about are called the pasta filata family. The 2 cheeses involved here are mozzarella and provolone. They originate from Italy. And in Italy, mozzarella is made from water buffalo milk. It's a very soft cheese, and it's often sold in its own liquid, and is not very suitable for shredding. But because we use so much mozzarella in the United States on pizza, the American version of this cheese had to be made firmer and harder so that it could be shreddable. To this end, we make 2 products actually in the mozzarella family, which we call low moisture part skim mozzarella, and the other one we call low moisture whole milk mozzarella. We call them low moisture to distinguish them from the Italian softer variety, and part skim because we remove some of the fat in the production method in order to make the cheese firmer. What makes both mozzarella and provolone unique is in the manufacturing step, they go through a process called pasta filata. Pasta filata is Italian, and it literally means spun dough. But in terms of cheese making, what actually happens when we make pasta filata cheese, I have described to you earlier how we make cheddar cheese. We get to the curd stage where we put salt on the curd and then press it into a block. But in making both mozzarella and provolone, we take the curd and we submerge it into very hot water. In the good old days, this was done in a bucket, and the cheesemaker would put in the curd into a bucket of hot water at about 168 degrees Fahrenheit. And once the curd had begun to melt and flow, he would put his hands in and pull and stretch that curd under the water for about 2 or 3 minutes. He would then take the pulled curd out of the bucket and then mold it into a shape. And the 2 shapes that were traditionally used for mozzarella, it was always made into a 20-pound rectangular slab or a 6-pound slab. And if he was making provolone, to distinguish it from mozzarella, he would mold it into a log, similar to the log we have here. In some cases, provolone was also molded into shapes like this, which could be sliced to give you slices of different diameter. And they were often tied with string so that in the case of provolone, the cheese itself would be hung in a smoke room so that it could take on a slight smoked flavor. So that's why they tie it up with string. The cheese itself, when you do this pasta filata process, you give the cheese a unique property, and that is it takes on what we call a chicken breast-like property. When you pull it apart like this, it begins to look like chicken breast. And We can see this in the cold cheese, but when we heat this cheese on a pizza, this same property gives us the stringiness that we see in cheese when we cut a pizza into a triangle and lift it, and we see the lovely stretch on the cheese as it melts. And that property comes from the pasta filata process. The big difference between mozzarella and provolone, though, lies in the fact that mozzarella is almost exclusively eaten as a cooked cheese and not to a huge extent as a cold cheese. Provolone, on the other hand, is much more of a table cheese, and the reason it takes on that characteristic is that it is given an additional enzyme into the milk when the cheese is made. This enzyme is called lipase, and it goes to work on the fat in the cheese. And the enzyme breaks down the fat and gives the cheese its unique flavor. This same flavor is also found in other cheeses, such as feta, Asiago, Romano, and some other Italian cheeses. And this flavor is, as I say, purely derived from the fat by using an enzyme to break down the cheese. Both mozzarella and provolone are very big sellers in America. We currently eat on mozzarella alone 11 pounds per annum. So there's a lot of this cheese eaten, primarily on pizza, but it has many applications, as has provolone, which can be eaten hot and cold. Eaten cold on sandwiches, but also in a cooked basis. The same slice of provolone takes on the same stringiness as mozzarella and is a wonderful cheese to work with. The next cheese that I'd like to talk to you about is Parmesan. Parmesan comes to us from Italy, where it has been made for over 2,000 years. In fact, this cheese developed around the time of the Roman Empire, and the Romans, who were trying to conquer the world, wanted their soldiers to be able to go for 10, 12 days and carry their own food with them. And back then, of course, you couldn't go down to your local supermarket and buy a tin of Spam to do this. So they turned to the cheesemakers, and they looked to the cheesemakers to make them a very resilient cheese that could be carried with ease by their soldiers. The cheesemakers discovered that by heating the cheese at a particular point in the cheese-making process, they were able to drive out a lot of the moisture in the cheese and make it very hard. They also found that if they took some of the fat out, they could make it harder still, and that the cheese would be very resilient and would break down very slowly and become a unique tasting product. So 2,000 years ago, they were making cheeses like Grana Padano, which we have here, and they were also making Reggiano Parmigiano, and it's from that cheese that the current product, Parmesan, takes its name. So when it's made in the United States, we call it Parmesan. We make it in wheels like this. And as I said earlier, it's a very hard cheese. The moisture content of this cheese is around 32%. And they also take some of the fat out of it, so that makes the texture of the cheese, hard and brittle. So it's not possible when you take this Parmesan cheese, it's not possible to cut slices out of it because the cheese texture is brittle and would break. But you can cut it into shreds, and another form that the cheese is sold in is as a grated form. So they just break the cheese up and grate it. And a secondary step that can be done with this cheese, that is done with this cheese, is to actually make it into what we call dry grated. Dry grated is the form of Parmesan that it does not require any refrigeration. And what they do is they grind up the cheese, which has 32% moisture, and then they put it through a drying step again and reduce the moisture down to 18 to 20%. This gives us a almost fine powder, but it's pure cheese, and this cheese then is shelf stable and can be kept on your table without refrigeration and will keep for over a year in this condition. Because the development of flavor within Parmesan is related to the breakdown of not the fat, because we've taken some of the fat out, but to the breakdown of protein in the cheese. And because the moisture is so low, it takes a long time for this process to happen. In fact, we cannot legally call Parmesan until it has aged for a minimum of 10 months. So the flavor buildup in this cheese is slow and very deliberate, and by the time it gets to 10 months of age, we can officially call it Parmesan. And this flavor is unique and intense and allows Parmesan to be used in many, many applications. Its traditional use on Italian dishes with pasta or risotto, it is almost quintessential to those foods. But it has many, many applications, and small quantities of this cheese will really spice up dishes either hot or cold. The final cheese I'd like to talk about is Swiss cheese. It's a family of cheeses that comes to us, as the name implies, from Switzerland, but it's actually modeled after a type of cheese made in the Emmer Valley in Switzerland, and which makes the cheese Emmental. There are many varieties of Swiss cheese around the world. The one here, Jarlsberg, is made in Norway. But in America, we call it simply Swiss, or we call the style Swiss, and then we have a number of varieties of it. The varieties include regular Swiss, aged Swiss, lacy Swiss, sweet Swiss, and baby Swiss. What's unique about Swiss cheese is the fact that it has these eyes, and the eyes get into the cheese via a bacteria. The bacteria is called propionic acid bacteria, and the cheesemakers put this bacteria into the milk, and they make the cheese, but they don't want the bacteria to grow until the cheese has aged for about 20 days. At that point, the texture of the cheese has become elastic and is pliable. And they then take the cheese to a warm room at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And at that temperature, it allows these propionic acid bacteria to grow. Propionic acid bacteria have a strange name, but they're called that because as they grow, they produce propionic acid. And propionic acid is the acid that gives the cheese its sweet and nutty flavor. When these bacteria grow, they also produce a gas which is called carbon dioxide. And inside in the cheese, the gas has nowhere to go, so the texture has to be soft and elastic to allow the gas to come together and form holes in the cheese. In regular and aged Swiss cheese, these holes can vary in size, but they shouldn't get up to much bigger than the size of a quarter. In the case of baby Swiss, which is another very popular cheese, the holes are smaller. As we can see here, they're probably more like a dime size hole. Difference between regular Swiss and baby Swiss is when we make regular or aged Swiss, we take some of the fat out of the milk, which makes the cheese firmer. In the case of baby Swiss, we leave the fat in and the cheese is considerably softer and smoother. While they both produce the same flavor and the flavor that is synonymous with Swiss cheese, which is that sweet nutty flavor, the baby Swiss is considerably, because it has more fat, it has more of a dairy note to it. Baby Swiss is also made in smaller size wheels, whereas the regular Swiss is made in considerably larger wheels. Swiss cheese, of course, has many applications, but it is absolutely synonymous with ham sandwiches. It's also used in dips, it's used in quiches, and has many applications, both as baby Swiss and as regular Swiss, and is a superb, both of which are superb cheeses, and they are made by cheesemakers that put a lot of care and attention, because there's no doubt that Swiss cheese is the hardest cheese to make from a cheesemaker's point of view. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about some of these cheeses, and I wish you the best of luck in selling them.